The coins were cold. Lyion watched them fall from her father's palm into the trader's waiting hand, one by one, each landing with a flat, unhurried sound. She counted them from the doorway before she understood what she was counting. 80 coins. The paper was signed before she had finished the count. Her father tucked the pen away without looking at her, and the transaction that ended her life as she had known it was complete. He had not looked at her once. She was given 2 hours. One bag. Her grandmother's ring was not permitted because it had value, and value now belonged to him. She packed a dress, her winter shawl, a small knife in the lining of her boot, and a sprig of dried lavender from the window shelf that she could not explain taking, except that it was the last thing in the house that felt like hers. No one came to the door when the cart pulled away. It took 11 days to reach Veilthorne. The capital rose from the valley with the certainty of something that had never questioned its right to exist. Ancient towers catching the morning light in shades of iron and bronze. Lyion had heard stories about it her whole life. She had not imagined arriving in a trader's cart beside 3 other women who held their bags in their laps and stared at the floor. A steward with a ledger received them at the lower gate before dawn. Names were checked. Assignments were given in the same tone used for noting inventory. Lyion was placed in household service, a narrow bed in the lower quarters, invisible hours in clean corridors. She told herself this was survivable, and 6 weeks later she was still telling herself this when the choosing was announced. The choosing moved through the castle like water finding cracks. The Alpha King of Veilthorne would hold the formal selection at the full moon. Every daughter of eligible blood had been summoned. The realm would witness. A queen would be named. Lyion had no part in any of it. On the night itself, her place was along the northern wall with the rest of the lower staff, present but invisible, which had become the condition she was learning to inhabit with something that was not peace, but was at least familiar. She stood there now. The great hall looked nothing like it did on ordinary days. 800 candles blazed in the iron chandeliers overhead and turned the stone and silver of the hall into something that breathed and glowed. Pack leaders from every territory occupied the floor. Noble families watched from the tiered galleries above with the stillness of people for whom this evening represented years of careful work reaching its conclusion. On the raised platform at the far end, 12 women stood in a line. Daughters of the oldest houses, trained since childhood for this possibility, wearing gowns worth more than the village Lyion had come from. She studied the floor near her left boot, an unevenness in the mortar between 2 stones. She had been studying it for 10 minutes. The Alpha King entered from the eastern doors. She had seen him in passing, in corridors and courtyards, always at a distance that kept him manageable. She had decided the stories about him were the kind of exaggeration powerful men accumulate without effort. She understood now, watching him cross the hall, that she had been wrong. Soren of Veilthorne crossed the great hall with the unhurried certainty of something that had never needed to prove what it was. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that was not handsome in any calculated way, but was entirely, uncompromisingly present. His eyes moved across the assembled crowd with the steady sweep of someone who reads a room the way other people read words. The ceremony began. The elder at the platform's edge recited lineages and formal declarations in a carrying voice that filled the hall to its rafters. Lyion returned her attention to the floor, the draft from the northern corridor, the quiet. She did not see the moment his eyes found her. She only knew it because the air changed in a way she had no language for. A shift in something below the level of sound, and some part of her that had not been consulted, lifted her gaze across the width of the hall. Soren, Alpha King of Veilthorne, was looking directly at her. Not at the platform, not at the gathered nobility of the realm, at the northern wall, at her. And he was not looking away. The murmur began before she had fully understood what she was seeing. She watched it move outward through the room in ripples, confusion spreading through the galleries, pack leaders exchanging glances, the 12 women on the platform looking at each other with expressions she could not read from this distance. Soren stepped down from the platform and walked toward her. The crowd parted. Not because anyone commanded it, because it was simply not possible to stand in the path of that particular intention without understanding you were in the wrong place. The distance between the platform and the northern wall became very short very quickly. He stopped in front of her. His eyes were not the amber she had expected from the stories. Something darker, warmer. The color amber reaches when it has been held over a flame long enough to change into something without a clean name. He looked at her for a moment that had no comfortable length. "Your name," he said, nearly quietly, as if the question was meant only for her. "Lyion." Something moved in his expression. Not surprise. Something that looked like relief. He unclasped the ceremonial cloak from his shoulders and settled it around her without asking permission and without taking his eyes from her face. Then he turned to address the hall. "I have made my choice," he said. The silence that followed was the most complete silence she had ever been inside. Then the High Counselor crossed the platform in 4 quick strides and bent to speak into the king's ear, his face pale and tight with something between urgency and fury. Soren's jaw tightened. His shoulders shifted in the way a man shifts when he receives what he already knew was coming. He said something brief in return. He stepped back toward the platform. He said something to the assembled hall in a careful public voice about process and the council's formal role in matters of the crown, and the room exhaled, and somewhere in the upper galleries, a woman laughed softly with the particular satisfaction of someone watching a plan succeed. Lyion stood against the northern wall with his cloak around her shoulders and understood with the clarity of someone who has been sold for 80 coins exactly what it looks like when a decision is being reversed. She folded the cloak, set it on the stone ledge, walked to the servants' corridor without running, because running would have been the last dignity she had left to surrender. She did not know that less than 2 minutes after she disappeared from the northern wall, Soren left the platform without a word and walked directly to her room in the servants' quarters. She did not know he stood there for a long moment with her folded cloak in his hands and an expression on his face that none of his court had ever seen. She did not know he went looking for her immediately. By the time he reached the lower gate, Lyion was already gone. And in the upper gallery, half hidden behind a carved stone pillar, a figure in deep gray watched the kings retreating back, with the stillness of someone who had just watched the first move of a game they had spent years preparing to win. The village of Cinderwick did not ask questions. This was what Lyion valued most about it. More than the room she rented above the grain merchant's storage, more than the 3 days of distance between here and the nearest pack settlement. Cinderwick survived at the far edge of the Western Territories on the practical philosophy that a quiet stranger who paid in advance and caused no trouble was the best possible kind of stranger. She had given her name as Marin, a widow, traveling to family in the far west, needing rest before continuing. The grain merchant's wife had looked at her once with the evaluating gaze of a woman who has heard many versions of this story and has decided long ago that the truth beneath it is rarely her concern. She had given Lyion the room without further questions. That had been 4 months ago. She had not continued west. Cinderwick found uses for her. She could read and write, which made her valuable to the village elder. She knew enough herbcraft to help with the ailments that cycled through a small settlement every winter. She was quiet and reliable and did not become a subject of conversation, which in a village this size was the closest thing to invisibility available. She should have moved on. Every week she told herself that she would, once she was rested, once the roads improved. Once she felt less like a person who had left half of herself behind in a servant's corridor in a city she was never going back to. Every week she found a reason that the week was not yet the right week. She had stopped searching for the reason and had simply begun existing inside the days as they came. which were not good days, but were days she could manage, and managing had become the standard she was working with. She knew why she had not moved on. She had discovered the reason 6 weeks after arriving, sitting at the edge of her bed in the gray silence of early morning with her hands pressed flat to her stomach, and a certainty arriving all at once, not gradually but complete, the way important truths do. She sat with it for a long time before she let herself fully understand what it meant. One night, weeks before the choosing, a conversation in the lower library that had begun about the medicinal herbs growing in the inner courtyard and stretched past midnight, and then past that. In the quiet way of two people who have stopped noticing the time because the talking has become more necessary than sleep. She had not planned any of it. She had not expected any of what followed. His child was growing inside her while she hid under a false name at the edge of the world. She lay awake most nights with her hands on the small curve of her belly, feeling the faint flutter of movement that had begun in recent weeks. "You deserved a better beginning than this," she said into the dark one night. She paused. "You were made the only knight I was ever truly seen. That is the one thing I can give you that I will not take back." She did not say it again, but she thought it most nights, lying in the narrow bed with her face turned east, which she had begun doing without deciding to. She corrected it one morning and woke the next, facing east again. After the third time she stopped correcting it. The mark on her inner wrist had appeared 3 weeks after she arrived in Cinderwick. Small and silver, just below the inside of her left wrist. She had no explanation for it. Nothing had touched her wrist on the night it appeared. It burned. Not constantly. In pulses. A rhythm that felt less like an injury and more like a second heartbeat that was not hers. Slow and patient and faintly directional, pointing east through the dark each night she lay awake. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself this the way she had been telling herself everything was manageable for 4 months, which was to say, not very convincingly at all. The burning changed. Lyion woke on a gray morning 2 weeks into her 5th month in Cinderwick, with her wrist pressed hard against her chest and the mark pulsing in a rhythm that was nothing like what she had grown accustomed to. Sharp, insistent. Not the dull, patient ache she had been managing since winter, but something urgent. The difference between a distant sound and something pressing its face against the glass. She rose and dressed and went to her work table and tried to work. The mark pulsed through every task she set herself. She had started pressing her palm flat over her wrist at intervals throughout the day, as though pressure might quiet it. It did not quiet it. It had been like this for 2 weeks, worsening each morning, more directional with each day. She had stopped examining what it was pointing toward. Examining it led to conclusions she was not ready to act on. The pregnancy showed plainly now. The women of Cinderwick had known for weeks before she acknowledged it herself. The elder's wife left extra bread at her door twice a week without comment. The blacksmith's daughter waved at her from across the lane every morning with the easy warmth of someone who had decided Lyion was a neighbor and required no further explanation. She was grateful for both in ways she was not able to say out loud. It was Asta who brought the news. The trader's wife appeared at Lyion's door on a cold morning with a basket of preserves that was clearly a pretext, settled herself at the small table inside, and lowered her voice. "Traders came through last night from the capital. 6 of them, moving fast." She turned her cup in her hands. "They say the Alpha King has not completed the choosing. No queen named. They say he has been sending wolves to every settlement between Veilthorne and the southern border for 3 months, looking for a young woman. No house. No name. Only a description." Lyion kept her hands still on the table. "What description?" Asta looked at her steadily. "Dark hair. Young. Left the capital the night of the choosing." She paused. "They say he has offered 10,000 gold pieces." The room was quiet. "The affairs of the capital do not reach this far," Lyion said. "Usually not. Asta agreed. She stayed for an hour, which she had never done before. When she rose to leave, she put her hand over Lyrion's briefly, the gesture of a woman saying something that has no words, and pulled the door closed behind her. Lyion sat at the table for a long time. 10,000 gold. 3 months of searching. Every settlement between Veilthorne and the southern border. She pressed her palm flat over the mark on her wrist. It burned through her hand so sharply she had to close her eyes. She was still sitting there when she saw the wolves. She looked toward the window without knowing why, the way you look toward a sound you have not yet consciously registered, and at the tree line where the forest met the eastern edge of Cinderwick she saw them. 3 wolves, gray-coated, silver-marked at the chest and shoulders, standing at the boundary of the trees with the absolute stillness of things that have arrived at a destination. Their amber eyes were fixed on the village, on one specific door among all the doors in Cinderwick. The lead wolf turned its head and looked directly at the window where Lyion sat. The mark on her wrist ignited. Not the familiar pulse. Something vast erupted up her arm and settled behind her ribs like a fire lit from a source she could not locate. And beneath the heat, pressing against the edge of her awareness with a force that was unlike anything she had felt in 4 months of slow burning, she felt a presence. Searching. Desperate in the specific way of someone who does not know whether what they are looking for is still alive. Lyion pushed back from the window. One hand went to her wrist, the other went to her stomach. The wolves had not moved. They did not need to move. He was close. Close enough that the distance between them could now be measured in hours rather than months. And she did not know yet, not with any certainty, whether the feeling pressing through the mark on her wrist was warning or answer. Whether what was coming toward her through the winter dark was the thing she had been running from, or the thing she had, without admitting it to herself, been facing east for. The knock came before dawn. Not urgent, not the hammering of someone carrying emergency. 3 measured strikes. The knock of someone who has been trained that control is the most important thing you can bring into a difficult conversation. Lyion sat up in the dark and did not move. The wolves at the tree line the previous evening had not come to the door. She had watched until nightfall and then watched a while longer, and they had remained at the boundary of the forest the entire time, patient as standing stones, before the dark finally swallowed them. She had not slept. The mark on her wrist had burned without pause all night. 3 knocks again. Identical rhythm. She got up, pulled her shawl around her shoulders, and took the knife from the boot by the door before she answered it. The man on the threshold was older than she had expected. Silver threaded heavily through his dark hair, and his face was weathered in a way that spoke of decades spent outdoors and in difficult company. He was broad through the shoulders, with amber eyes that assessed her in a single sweep, and then did something she had not anticipated from any wolf who had come looking for her. They softened. "You are Lyion," he said. Not a question. She kept the knife visible. "My name is Marin." "Your name is Lyion," he said, with the patience of a man who has decided the truth is more important than courtesy. "I am Calder, first beta to the Alpha King. I have been searching for you for 11 weeks. If the king sent you, I have nothing to say to him. The king did not send me. He does not know your exact location. I found you because the bond between you is strong enough that someone in close service to him can feel the direction of it." He paused. "May I come in? What I have to tell you should not be said on a doorstep." The mark on her wrist pulsed hard. She stepped back. He entered alone and stood in the center of the small room, taking it in with the careful gaze of a man cataloging what a person's life tells him about how they have been surviving. He looked at the herb bundles on the work table, the narrow bed, the single window facing east. He looked at her, and at the curve of her stomach, and something moved through his expression that he did not try to hide. "He does not know about the child," Lyion said, "and you will not tell him." That is not my information to share, Calder said. But I will tell you that when he finds you, and he will find you, the knowledge of it will break something in him that may not recover quickly. He sat down at the small table. What do you believe happened the night of the choosing? She crossed her arms. I was there. Tell me what you saw. He chose me. The counselor intervened. He stepped back from the choice, said something about formal processes and the council's role, and the ceremony continued without me. She kept her voice even. I left. Calder was quiet for a moment. What the counselor whispered to him, he said, was that there were 3 crossbows aimed at you from the upper galleries. Hired weapons, positioned there before the ceremony began, with orders to fire the moment the king made any formal declaration in your favor. Lyion's next breath stopped in her chest. The man who arranged it was Lord Farron of House Dreven. His daughter Visara was among the 12 candidates. He had spent 4 years positioning her for that night. When Soren walked past 11 women of noble blood and stopped in front of you, Farron gave the signal. The counselor intercepted it and reached the king first. Calder leaned forward. Soren had 30 seconds to decide. He said something deliberately ambiguous. His own court heard it as a retraction. The crossbowman heard it as a retraction and stood down. He paused. What he actually said was that the formal announcement would be made in 3 days, not a retraction, a delay. He put his cloak on you and made his choice, and bought himself 3 days to remove 3 armed men from his hall before he announced to the world who you were. The room was very still. He expected you to stay, Calder continued. He did not know you had heard it differently. He went to find you the moment the crossbowmen were detained, when you were gone. He stopped, started again. He has not slept properly since that night. His wolf refuses to eat more than is required to function. He has been driving his own guard past the point of endurance, searching every settlement between Veilthorne and the southern border. He met her gaze. I say none of this to compel you. I say it because it is the truth, and you have a right to it before you make any decision. Lyion pressed her hand over the mark on her wrist and felt it pulse steadily, the same direction it had kept for 4 months. The 10,000 gold, she said, was never about finding you through informants. He used it to buy out every ledger in the realm that carried your name, every record of the transaction that brought you to Veilthorne. When you come back, if you choose to come back, you will not come back as someone who was sold. Calder's voice was careful. He made certain of that first, before anything else. Lyion stood with her hand over her wrist and felt the thing she had been most afraid to feel since the night she had folded his cloak and walked out of the great hall. The possibility that she had been wrong, that the story she had rebuilt her life around was a story built from one angle on one moment, and that from another angle it looked entirely different. Calder reached into his coat and set a folded paper on the table between them. The seal was broken. The crest in the wax was a serpent coiled around a blade. She recognized the crest from his description. House Dreven. She unfolded the paper. 4 lines. The girl has been located in the Western Territories. The child she carries cannot be permitted to reach term. Both matters will be resolved before the next new moon. House Dreven keeps its promises. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. How long ago did they locate me? She asked. We believe 3 days, Calder said. We intercepted this by chance. We do not know how many have already been sent or how close they are. Outside, in the pre-dawn quiet of Cinderwick, a dog began to bark. Then another. Then nothing. Calder was on his feet before the silence finished settling. The cellar, he said. Now. There is no exit from the cellar, Lyion said. You only need to survive until I can clear them. He was already at the window, looking out at the lane. Whatever he saw made him still for one breath. Then he turned back. 4 of them, possibly 5, already in the village. Cinderwick has no walls, Lyion said. They walked in. Yes. He looked at her with the focused calm of someone who survives dangerous situations by wasting no time on anything that is not immediately useful. Can you run? She looked at her stomach. Not far. Not fast. He swore quietly and pulled a knife from his coat, long-bladed and silver along one edge, and pressed it into her hands. Silver slows a shifted wolf significantly. Stay low. If they get past me, wound and run. Do not stand and fight. He looked at the mark on her wrist. The king is not close enough, but he is closer than he was yesterday. How close? Close enough that if you stop managing the bond and let it open, he will feel you. You have been keeping it dim for 4 months. If you let it fully open, he will feel everything you are feeling. He will know exactly where you are. I know what it means to open it, she said. Then you know the choice. He went to the door. Stay low. Stay quiet. He was gone. She heard the first impact 30 seconds later. Not a crash. Not a shout. The specific compressed force of 2 large things meeting at speed, which was somehow worse than noise. It was followed by a snarl from Calder's wolf form that raised the hair along her arms and sent the child moving against her ribs with the restless insistence of a small body that could feel its mother's fear. Lyion pressed herself against the wall beside the window and looked out. 3 shapes moved in the lane. Calder's wolf, gray and silver-streaked, was already bleeding from a gash across his shoulder and fighting 2 dark wolves simultaneously. He was moving well, but he was losing ground, and she could see the deliberate precision with which the pair of them were angling for position, wearing him down rather than rushing, the strategy of wolves who had done this before, and knew patience was more effective than speed. A 4th shape moved around the far side of the building. Not toward Calder, toward her door. Lyion stepped back from the window. The knife was in her right hand, blade out. She pressed herself flat against the wall beside the door and breathed through her teeth, and waited. The door held 3 seconds longer than she expected. Then it did not. The wolf that came through it was black-coated and fast, and it had located her by scent before it cleared the threshold. It crossed the room in 2 bounds. She dropped and drove the silver blade into its shoulder as it passed over her, and the sound it made was terrible. It crashed into the work table, scattering everything, and scrambled upright with one front leg at a damaged angle. Wounded. Not finished. She had 4 steps to the back door. She made 3 before it lunged. The impact caught her shoulder rather than her back, a glancing collision that spun her into the wall instead of putting her on the floor. She kept her feet. She hit the back door with her uninjured shoulder and shoved through into the cold. The back lane was empty. She ran. She made it to the far edge of the mill yard before her body began delivering the message she had been overriding, that running hard through snow at 7 months was a transaction with a specific cost, and the cost had arrived. She slowed to a walk she could sustain and kept moving into the open field beyond the mill, where there was no cover, but there was distance, and distance was what she had. Behind her in the village, Calder's wolf made a sound that was not quite pain, but was close enough to it that she recognized the difference between a wolf that is winning and one that is no longer winning. She stopped. She stood in the open field with snow up past her boots and the mark on her wrist burning steadily, and thought about what Calder had said, about opening the bond, about what it meant to stop managing it and let him feel what she was feeling, which was cold and fear, and the child pressing against her ribs with small, worried movements, and 4 months of grief she had stored in a place she had tried very hard not to revisit. She had kept all of it exactly where it was. She pressed both hands over her wrist. She stopped suppressing it. The bond opened like a door blown inward by wind from the other side. Everything she was feeling went through it at once. The cold and the fear and the pain in her shoulder, and the child's movements and 4 months of longing she had not let herself name until this exact moment when it had nowhere left to hide. She felt it travel outward, and she felt the moment it arrived, felt the impact it made on whatever was on the other side of the distance between them, and the answering presence that came back through was so overwhelming it nearly drove her to her knees in the snow. She heard him before she saw him, not howling. The sound of something moving at full speed through the dark with one purpose, and the ground carrying the faint vibration of it. And then the tree line at the far end of the field coming apart as something enormous and black drove through it without breaking stride. He crossed the field in the time it took her to draw 2 full breaths. He stopped. Less than 10 feet from her, in the snow, in the dark before dawn, he stood. A wolf the size of something the stories barely did justice to, black-coated and golden-eyed and breathing in the hard, fast rhythm of something that has been running toward the same point for a very long time. He looked at her. She looked at him. She did not know, standing there with the knife in her hand and the mark still burning, whether he had come to reclaim her or confirm what the bond had delivered. Whether the thing behind those gold eyes was the thing she had spent 4 months refusing to hope for, or whether it was something else entirely. She had been so certain she understood that night in the great hall. She had rebuilt her whole life on that certainty. She was no longer certain of anything except that he was here, and the distance between them was exactly the length of everything she did not yet know. The shift happened between one breath and the next. The wolf was there, and then a man knelt in the snow where it had been. His hands braced against the ground, dark hair falling forward, breathing hard from the run. He looked up. She had told herself during the months of exile that grief had made his face into something larger than it was. That memory embroiders what it wants to keep. She had been wrong about that. Soren rose to his feet. He looked at her with an expression she had no clean name for, not relief and not anger, but something unguarded and costly. The expression of a man who has been holding something at great expense and has just arrived at the moment where the expense can no longer be sustained. His eyes dropped to her stomach. He went completely still. "Lyion," he said. Not a question. She had been told it would not be a question. She had not been told it would sound exactly like that. "Do not," she said. Her voice held. "Whatever you are about to say, do not say it yet. I need to ask you something first, and I need you to answer it honestly." He closed his mouth and waited. "Did you come here because you wanted to?" she said. "Or because the bond pulled you and you followed it?" "It is not a distinction I can separate," he said, "wanting something and being drawn toward it. I have never known where one ends and the other begins where you are concerned. I am not sure they are different things." She absorbed this. "Then I will tell you what I know. I know that you stood in front of me in your own hall and put your cloak on my shoulders in front of every pack leader and noble family in the realm. And I know that less than 3 minutes later you were talking about formal processes and the council's role, and I was standing against that wall understanding that whatever had just happened was already being undone. I know what I saw." "I know what you saw," he said. "I walked out of your city with one bag and a knife in my boot," she continued. "I had nowhere to go. I had no name of my own that was not on a purchased ledger. I have been hiding in a village at the edge of the known world for 4 months because I believed that what I witnessed was the truth of you. And I built everything on that belief. And I need you to understand what it cost before you say a single word in your defense." He did not say a word in his defense. He stood in the snow and let her finish and did not flinch from any of it. And when she was done, he said quietly, "Are you hurt?" "From tonight." Before anything else. She blinked. Of everything she had prepared for him to say, that had not been among them. "My shoulder. I hit a wall. It is not serious." He looked at her shoulder in the pre-dawn light, and whatever he saw there moved through his jaw once before he controlled it. She recognized the discipline of a man deciding not to let his wolf answer on his behalf. "Tell me," she said. "What happened that night?" He told her. He told her about the crossbows in the upper galleries, about the 30 seconds and what the counselor had whispered, and the choice it left him with. He told her that what he said to the hall was not a retraction, but a delay, that he had expected her to remain in the castle for 3 days while he dealt with the threat, and came to her properly to explain what he had done and why. He told her that he had gone directly to find her the moment the crossbowmen were detained, and that when the corridor was empty and the room was empty and she was gone, he had understood for the first time the full cost of having been unclear in a moment when clarity was the only thing that mattered. "You were protecting me," she said. "Badly," he said, "in 30 seconds with no time to tell you what I was doing." "Yes. And then I was gone. And then I searched," he said. "Every day since, every road and every settlement and every territory between Veilthorne and the border. I have not taken a queen. I have not sat in the same room as Visara Draven since that night. I have not done a single thing a man does when he has changed his mind." She thought about the mark burning east every night for 4 months, about the presence she had felt through it in the dark, desperate and directional, that she had turned down low and covered and refused to interpret. "The 10,000 gold," she said, "was not a bounty," he said. "Every ledger in the realm that carried your name has been bought and cancelled. Every record of what brought you to Veilthorne is gone." He was quiet for a moment. "The man who accepted the 80 coins. I found him. I did not harm him. I gave his village enough gold that they will not go hungry for a generation, and I took the ledger page and burned it." He looked at her steadily. "You were never purchased. Whatever happened before the night I put that cloak on you, you were never something to be bought. You were recognized. By me, by the bond, by something older than either of us that apparently has very specific ideas about who belongs with whom." The last of that was almost dry, almost quiet, and it split something open in her chest that she had been keeping sealed for 4 months. She was still angry. She wanted him to know that understanding why something happened and forgiving it for happening were not the same transaction, and she was not yet finished with the first one. But the story she had carried out of Veilthorne, the story of a king who had chosen her as a cruelty and then taken it back, was not the story of what had actually occurred, and she could feel the weight of the wrong version of it lifting away from her with a physical quality, like setting down something she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it was not part of her. "I am still angry," she said. "Good," Soren said. "I would be more concerned if you were not." The sound of boots on snow came from the direction of the village. Calder emerged, holding one arm against his ribs with the careful stillness of a man managing something broken. He had reassembled his composure over whatever the last 20 minutes had cost him, but the cost was visible underneath it. "4 are dealt with," he said. "But a rider left the village 10 minutes ago. He will reach whoever sent him within the hour, and what he carries is the location of this field." He looked at Soren. "We cannot stay." Soren looked at Lyion. The question was clear and carried no pressure, which was exactly how she would have needed it to be, and which made it harder rather than easier. "You are asking me," she said. "I will not take you anywhere you do not choose." She looked at the mark on her wrist, at the man standing in the snow who had spent 4 months searching and had used his first 10,000 gold pieces to make her free before he asked her for anything at all. The anger had not left. She suspected it would take time, and from the look on his face she suspected he already knew this and was prepared to wait as long as it required. "I will come," she said, "but there are things I still need to say to you." "I know," Soren said. "You will have time for all of them. I am not going anywhere without you again." They moved out into the pre-dawn dark together. Calder slightly ahead with his broken ribs and his steady pace, and Cinderwick fell away behind them, and Lyion kept one hand on the mark at her wrist and felt it burning warmly in a rhythm that was, for the first time in 4 months, answered from the other side. The horses were staged at the far end of the forest road, where Calder's scouts had left them before the attack. 3 dark animals, steady and quiet, their breath clouding in the cold. Soren lifted Lyion onto the saddle before she could object, swung up behind her, and settled his arm around her waist with the quiet deliberateness of someone who has thought about this specific moment for a long time and intends to do it correctly. "I can ride," she said. "I know you can," he said. "Humor me." She intended to argue. The warmth of him at her back after all those months of cold and alone was not something she had adequately prepared for. And somewhere between the intention and the execution, she lost the thread of it. They rode through what remained of the night, Calder slightly ahead with his broken ribs held together by will, the scouts spread wide in the dark on either side. The forest road was empty and silent except for hooves on frozen ground and the wind in the bare branches above. Soren spoke quietly as they rode. He told her things she had not asked for and had not known she needed. He told her about the morning after the choosing, when he had stood alone in her empty room with her folded cloak in his hands, and understood for the first time the full cost of 30 seconds of unclear language. He told her about the first week of searching, how power is a complete and useless thing when the one task you need it for is finding someone who does not want to be found, and how that inadequacy had been more clarifying than any lesson in judgment he had ever received. "I could feel you," he said. "Not clearly, not with any direction, but there was always a warmth. Toward you. Everything else was cold." Lyion was quiet for a moment. "I could feel you searching," she said. "I told myself it meant nothing." "I know," he said. "I felt you telling yourself that. Resistance through the bond reads differently than silence. Silence is nothing. Resistance is someone on the other side of the door." She turned to look at him. "It was worse than silence," he said simply. She turned forward again. Somewhere in the hours between midnight and dawn, she slept. She was aware of it the way you are aware of crossing from one room to another, a softening of the dark behind her eyes and the horse's hooves dropping to something more distant. She had not slept properly since Cinderwick began. His warmth was not something her body was willing to negotiate with. She did not feel him slow his horse. She did not feel him signal to Calder to drop the pace. She did not feel him shift his arm to hold her more securely against his chest, so she would not list in the saddle. She was already too far under for any of it. She would learn later that he did not move for 6 hours. That when Calder offered to take her so he could ride ahead, Soren had looked at him once and said nothing, and Calder had not asked again. She woke to pale gray light and Calder's voice, low and careful, saying the king's name. Veilthorne lay below them in the valley, its towers catching the first color of dawn. 300 years of stone arranged around a seat of authority that had never once been taken by force in its entire history. Above the castle gates, the silver serpent of House Draven moved in the morning wind. Soren went completely still behind her, not with shock, with the precise, dangerous stillness of a man receiving confirmation of something he already knew was possible. A scout came up from the valley road hard and fast, his horse lathered and his face white. "My king. Lord Farron has declared himself regent. Visara has been named queen. The loyal guard and staff who refuse to yield, 31 of them, they are being held in the Great Hall." He paused. "Farron says they will be executed at noon unless you present yourself at the gates." The pause that followed had a specific weight inside it. "Among the 31, the scout said quietly, is Hesta, from the lower staff." Lyion closed her hand over the mark on her wrist and said nothing. She did not need to. Hesta. The name arrived differently than she had expected. less like new information and more like the confirmation of something she had been afraid to look at directly. She had not let herself think about Hesta in all the months of hiding, because thinking about Hesta meant thinking about every small kindness that had made her time in Veilthorne survivable, and thinking about those kindnesses made the loss of them sharper and sharper loss had served no purpose in a village at the edge of the world. Hesta had been small-boned and 60 years old, and had moved through the castle corridors with the efficiency of someone who has decided that purpose is the best disguise. She had brought extra firewood in the coldest weeks without being asked, and without mentioning it afterward. She had covered for 3 separate evenings when Lyion had been elsewhere than she was supposed to be, and had never once asked where. And on the morning after the choosing, when Lyion had walked through the lower corridor with her bag and her composed face and her heart in pieces, Hesta had pressed a small folded cloth into her palm without slowing her pace. Bread. 1 coin. A sprig of rosemary. No questions. "How many of the 31 are from the lower staff?" Lyion said. "Most of them," the scout said. She looked at the serpent banner moving above the gate and understood something with a completeness that left no room for argument. Those 31 people had known who she was. They had known for months, the way people in close quarters always know the things that are not quite hidden well enough, and they had said nothing. Had covered for her absences, had kept her secrets with the quiet solidarity of people who have decided, without anyone asking them to decide, that some things are worth protecting regardless of the cost. Not because they owed her anything, not because they had been instructed to, because they had looked at her and made a choice, the kind of choice that people with no power make when they decide that the absence of power is not the same as the absence of responsibility. They were in that hall because of it. "Farron will not honor any trade," Soren said, reading her. "If you go through those gates, Lyion, he will take you and keep the hostages regardless. He has no reason to release them." "I know," she said. "Then you already know you cannot trust his word." "I know," she said again, quieter. "I am not going because I believe his word is good. I am going because 31 people chose to protect something they did not have to protect, and they deserve someone who chooses them back." She turned to face him. "Give me 20 minutes," she said. "He will not move against me immediately. The child makes me worth more to him alive and negotiating than dead. He will want to arrange the terms himself, and that takes time." She held his gaze. 20 minutes. "Then come through the walls if you need to." "Lyion." "I know what I am doing," she said. "Or I know enough of it. Trust me the way I am choosing to trust you." Something passed between them through the bond. Not words. The full weight of what she was asking, and the full weight of what he understood about why she was asking it, and the fear on both sides which was real and present, and which neither of them was going to let be the deciding factor. He stepped aside. She walked toward the gates of Veilthorne. The soldiers at the entrance looked at each other and then stood back, because whatever they had been instructed to prepare for it had not been this. A woman in a traveling cloak walking toward them alone, with the particular certainty of someone who has made a decision and is finished deliberating about it. The gates opened. She walked through. Behind her, the iron doors swung closed with a sound like a sentence ending. The great hall of Veilthorne was exactly as she remembered it and entirely different. She had stood in this room once before as an invisible thing, pressed against the northern wall, watching history be made at a distance she was not supposed to close. She walked into it now through the main doors, and the space settled around her the way a room settles when the thing it has been waiting for finally arrives. The candles that had burned for the choosing were not lit. The hall was torchlit, colder and starker, stripped of the ceremony that had made it look like something other than stone. It looked like what it was. A room in which power was being held by the wrong person, and every person in it except Lord Farron knew it. Lord Farron of House Dreven sat in the king's chair on the raised platform. He was older than she had expected from the letters and the stories, gray-haired and sharp-featured, with the contained stillness of a man who considers his own composure his primary weapon. Visara stood at his right, wearing the colors of Veilthorne as though they had been made for her face arranged in the expression of someone rehearsing a role they have not yet fully inhabited. 31 hostages knelt in a line before the platform, hands bound, faces turned toward the doors. They saw her come through. She had expected fear on their faces, or the careful blankness of people being watched by those who intend them harm. She had not expected what actually happened, which was that the 3 women nearest to the doors, women from the lower staff whose names and daily rhythms she knew well, sat up straighter the moment they recognized her. One by one, the straightening moved down the line, each of the 31 finding some reserve of composure she had not known they were still holding and using it. Not defiance toward Farron, something directed at her, something that said, "We knew who you were, and we said nothing, and we would make the same choice again, and we are glad you came back." She found Hesta near the center of the line. The old woman was watching her with the same expression she had worn the morning she pressed bread and a coin and a sprig of rosemary into Lyon's palm without slowing her pace. The expression of someone who made a decision a long time ago and has not spent a single moment reconsidering it. Lyion stopped in front of Farron. "I was told you wanted to negotiate," she said. "I was told you were sensible enough to come alone," Farron said. He looked at her with the appraising gaze of a man taking inventory. "The girl from the ledger, I will say this for you. You have been considerably harder to remove than I planned for." "Release them," Lyion said. "All 31, in exchange for me." Farron smiled. "Walk to the center of the hall, put the knife on the floor, and I will consider your terms." She walked to the center of the hall. She put the knife on the floor. "Now release them," she said. "I do not think so," Farron said pleasantly, and rose from the chair. "What I have now is both the leverage and the prize. Releasing one for the other would be poor management." He descended from the platform with unhurried steps. "You will be kept somewhere comfortable until the child arrives, and then we will have a longer conversation about what happens next." He signaled to the soldiers at the walls. 2 came forward and took hold of her arms with the practiced grip of men who have done this before. And then the child moved. Not the small, careful movements she had grown accustomed to over 7 months. Something enormous and sudden, as though the small body inside her had been waiting for exactly this moment to make itself known. A surge of movement so forceful that it drove the breath from her chest and sent something running up her spine that was not pain and was not calm and was not anything she had felt before in any of the months of waiting. She had been running from her wolf since she was old enough to feel it trying to emerge, in the cart, through the 11 days of travel, through her time at the castle and 4 months in Cinderwick, suppressing it the way you hold a door closed against pressure, using effort that cost more each year, and a fear she had never had anyone to explain to her. Not fear of the wolf, fear of herself. Fear of what it might mean to be something she had been given no language for, born outside any pack, outside any structure that might have told her what she was and why she felt the way she felt, and why the world had always seemed to be asking something of her that she had never been given the tools to answer. She had been sold for 80 coins before she ever understood that the price said everything about the person who accepted it and nothing about her. She stopped running from it. In the center of the great hall of Veilthorne, with soldiers' hands on both her arms and 31 witnesses kneeling on the stone floor, and Lord Farron of House Draven advancing toward her, with the confidence of a man who has never once imagined that the thing he is underestimating might be the thing that ends him, she stopped. The mark on her wrist blazed white. Light moved outward through her limbs from her chest, and the first soldier let go of her arm and stepped back, and the second held for 3 more seconds before whatever he felt moving through her grip made the holding no longer possible. Farron stopped advancing. His voice, when he spoke, had lost the mildness. "What is this?" The pain arrived all at once, and it was significant, and she went to one knee on the stone floor and pressed her palms flat against the cold, and breathed through it and did not fight it. Every bone in her hands felt as though it was deciding something. Her spine felt as though it was completing an argument it had been making for years. The doors of the great hall came apart. Not opened. Apart. One of them left its hinges entirely, and the other swung back hard against the wall, and through the opening came Soren's wolf, black as the space between stars, moving at a speed that the hall's width did not provide adequate room for. Soldiers scattered. Visara screamed something sharp and tactical. Farron drew a long blade from his side. Lyion pressed her forehead to the cold stone and let the transformation finish. The pain peaked and broke. She stood. What stood in the center of the great hall was not the woman who had walked through the gates 20 minutes ago. A wolf stood on the stone where she had been, silver white, the color of moonlight on new snow, with amber eyes that were completely clear and completely hers. Smaller than Soren's black form, but not lesser in any way that mattered, with a stillness at its center that was nothing like fear. Calder was through the side entrance and already moving when he saw her. He stopped. "Her color," he said. Not loudly. He was not speaking to anyone in particular. His mother's color. And Soren, who was in the process of driving 4 driven soldiers backward with a force that did not leave room for distraction, heard those 2 words and went completely still for the length of one breath. His mother had been silver white, the last true Alpha Queen Veilthorne had produced. The wolf the old guard still described in the shorthand of people who believe that certain things carry meaning beyond coincidence. Silver white, they said, like the moon has a coat. He looked across the width of the hall at Lyrion's wolf. His wolf made a sound she had never heard from it before. Not fury, not warning. Something much older than either of those. Something that lived in the part of language that existed before words were invented to contain it. Lord Farron had raised his blade. He had chosen the moment carefully, waiting for the distraction of the shift, and he was fast and he was deliberate, and in any other circumstance, he might have been fast enough. She was faster. She covered the distance in 2 bounds and hit his sword arm at the wrist with the full force of her body and the precision of something that is not acting on thought, but on something older and more reliable than thought. The blade rang against the stone and skidded toward the far wall. She stood over him with her front paws on his chest and her jaws level with his face, and her amber eyes entirely calm. He was a man who had spent his entire life calculating the value of other people's weaknesses and the cost of his own exposures. She watched him do it now, lying on his back on the stone floor of the hall he had taken by treachery, and she watched the calculation arrive at its conclusion. He did not move. The calculation was visible on the remaining Draven soldiers, spreading from one to the next the way calculations spread when the mathematics become clear. They had agreed to fight one wolf and a disrupted court. What was in front of them was 2 wolves of the royal bloodline fighting together in an enclosed space, and the number of viable outcomes had narrowed considerably. Weapons were lowered, hands were raised. Visara had reached the far door and almost cleared it. Soren shifted to human form 2 steps before he reached her, caught her arm with a grip from which there was no sensible extraction, and turned her back toward the hall. Visara of House Draven," he said, in the carrying voice used when something is being said for the record. "You and your father are charged with treason against the crown, conspiracy to murder the true mate of the Alpha King, unlawful seizure of the seat of Veilthorne, and the attempted murder of the king's unborn heir. You will stand trial before the assembled packs of the realm." "The ceremony," Visera said. "You chose in front of everyone, the whole realm witnessed it." "Nothing I said that night was freely given," Soren said. A declaration made while 3 crossbows were aimed at the woman beside me is not a declaration. It was a delay. What I chose before the counselor ever reached me. The ceremony that followed is void. It always was. He handed her to the nearest of his wolves and turned. Lyion had shifted back. She stood in the center of the hall in her human form, breathing in the careful way of someone who has just done something significant and is still integrating the fact of it. Around her, the 31 hostages were being freed, Soren's wolves moving down the line with quick, efficient hands on the rope bindings. Hesta was already on her feet and moving toward Lyion with the determined speed of a small woman with a specific destination. "You foolish child," Hesta said, and put both arms around her. Lyion stood inside the embrace and felt something she had not felt since she walked out of the lower gate 4 months ago, the specific warmth that belongs only to someone who is exactly where they chose to be. Soren crossed the hall and stopped in front of her. He looked at her in the way he had looked at her from the platform the night of the choosing, except that this time she understood what she was seeing and did not look away from it. "You shifted," he said. "I stopped being afraid," she said. Apparently that was all it required. His expression did something complicated and complete. "Your wolf's color," he said. "Calder told me," she said. After. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something he was trying to say that was not yet available in words, and they both knew it, and neither of them tried to force it before it was ready. Some things need the space that silence provides before they can become language. "The bond," he said finally. He tilted his chin, baring the line of his throat, not commanding, offering, "If you will." She thought about the cart and the 11 days and the folded cloak left on a stone ledge, about 4 months of facing east in the dark, about the field and the snow and everything she had stored behind a door she finally chose to open. She placed her hand against the side of his neck and felt his pulse. Steady. Present. The same pulse she had felt against her spine for 6 hours on the road through the dark while he held her and did not move. Her teeth found the claiming place. The bond did not open. It detonated. Everything he had kept compressed through 4 months of searching came through her at full and unfiltered force. The morning he stood alone in her empty room and understood the full cost of what he had failed to make clear. The first week when power revealed itself as useless in the face of the one thing it could not locate. The nights of static when she was keeping herself dim, and how the resistance felt compared to silence. How it was worse than silence because at least silence was absence, and this was presence that was trying not to be. And one specific moment, small in the sequence of months, but somehow larger than the rest. Him, standing in her room in the lower quarters. Alone. The room still holding the particular quality of a space recently vacated. The warmth of it not yet entirely gone. The narrow bed still carrying the impression of someone who had slept there and was now gone. A sprig of dried lavender on the floor where it had fallen from her bag. Him, picking it up. Standing there with that small dry stem in his hand for a long time. Not going anywhere. Not doing anything except standing in the empty room in the quiet, with the expression of a man in the process of fully understanding something, which is always a slower process than simply knowing it. The full cost of 30 seconds of words chosen badly in a moment when the only currency that mattered was clarity. He had stood there long enough that the room had gone cold around him. He had still been holding the lavender when he left. When she stepped back, they were both unsteady in the same moment. "My queen," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "My king," she answered. The wolves of Veilthorne began to howl, not the battle sound from the assault on the gates. Something else, the sound a pack makes when something that has been wrong for a long time becomes, irrevocably and completely, right. Justice in Veilthorne moved with the deliberate ceremony that the assembled packs required, because what had been done was significant, and its resolution needed to be witnessed and understood. Lord Farron stood trial before every pack leader in the realm. The evidence was thorough, and the proceedings were public, and the verdict arrived without dissent. He was stripped of his house name and his lands and his wolf, the last of which was the sentence that made the assembly go quiet, because stripping a wolf is the most irreversible sentence available, and had not been carried out in 60 years. He was placed in the custody of the Eastern Wardens and would not see Veilthorne again in whatever years remained to him. Visara was exiled. A horse, a traveling pack, the clothes she stood in, and the southern border. She did not look back when she crossed it. Calder said it was the only dignified thing she had done in the entire proceeding, and the assembly chose not to disagree. The kingdom healed the way kingdoms heal, not all at once, and not without difficulty, but with the steady, purposeful movement of something that has had the obstruction removed and is returning to its nature. The crops in the eastern provinces improved. The wolves who had been restless and aggressive along the borders settled back into their territories, with the specific relief of animals whose pack order has been restored. The 31 hostages received the formal recognition of the crown, which meant land grants and the documented acknowledgement that they had served at personal cost. Hesta refused the land grant. She accepted instead a set of rooms in the upper castle and the title of First Keeper of the Queen's household, which was a position Sorin created on the spot, and which Hesta accepted with the efficiency of a woman who has been waiting for competent management to show up for some time. On the first warm evening of spring, when the light over Veilthorne was the particular gold that arrives just before dark and makes everything it touches look as though it was worth reaching, Lyion gave birth. One child. A girl. She had dark hair from the first moment, which was her father's, and gray eyes that would turn amber in time. She arrived into the world with strong opinions and maximum volume, which Calder observed was not surprising given what her first year had involved. Sorin held her in both hands with the focused attention of someone who has decided that nothing is more important than this single task, and intends to execute it with complete precision. He sat at the edge of the bed for a long time without speaking. "Marin," he said finally. Lyion looked at him. "The name you gave yourself when you had to hide," he said. "The name you were when you kept her safe, and kept yourself alive and faced east in the dark every night before either of us understood what that meant." He looked down at the small face against his chest. "She should have it. So we never forget what it cost to find each other. And so she knows that the hiding was not the shameful part." He looked up. "The hiding was the part that kept her alive," he said. "And so was the finding." Lyion reached over and touched the claiming mark on his throat, the healed silver scar that matched the one on her wrist, both of them now permanent and visible, and the shorthand the bond had always been trying to reach. Outside, in the courtyard below the window, a wolf lifted its voice, then another beyond that. The howl moved outward through the city and then past it, territory by territory, until the land between the mountains and the sea was filled with the sound of something that had no translation but meant, in the oldest possible way, that what was lost had been found and what was broken had been made whole, and what had been sold for 80 coins had turned out to be worth everything. The Alpha King of Veilthorne pressed his lips to his daughter's hair and tilted back his head and answered, "Thank you for listening. I hope this story stays with you."